Diabetes mellitus is a medical condition in which the body has a problem regulating the amount of glucose flowing through the blood. This is a problem with the production or activity of the regulatory hormone insulin. First, let's view how the body controls blood sugar levels. The primary organ behind it is the pancreas. It has several other digestive exocrine functions. We'll focus on two specialized types of endocrine cells called alpha cells and beta cells. When the blood glucose begins to raise above baseline, let's say because you just ate a meal containing carbohydrates, the beta cells detect this and release the hormone insulin. Something to note is that glucose by itself can't make its way into most of the cells of your body, and it requires the help of insulin. So one of the primary purposes of this hormone is to attach to certain receptors on the outside of your cells, which opens up channels allowing glucose to enter the cell and be used as energy. The other purpose of insulin is energy storage for later use. One form of storage is a slightly modified structure of glucose called glycogen, which is stored in the liver and muscles. Blood sugars start to dip down, maybe because you haven't eaten in a while or just worked out. The alpha cells detect this and release glucagon, which aims to do the opposite of insulin. Glucagon's goal is to raise the blood sugar by pulling from several different storage pools, one of which is the glycogen stored in the liver and muscles in a process called glycogenolysis. So how does this relate to diabetes? Well, in diabetics, insulin is either no longer being produced or just doesn't do its job very well. So glucose can't be used for energy in the cells or stored away, so the levels in the blood start to creep up. There are two types of diabetes. I'm going to go in reverse order, but we're just going to touch on the first one, which is type 2 diabetes. Type 2 diabetes is also referred to as insulin resistant because the receptors on the outside of the cells are desensitized due to a combination of genetic and lifestyle factors. So insulin simply doesn't work very efficiently for them. Now, this is manageable with meds, usually curable with lifestyle changes, and accounts for most cases of diabetes. The other form is type 1 diabetes, or insulin dependent, and that's because you don't produce your own insulin, so you're dependent on it from external sources. This happens because type 1 is an autoimmune disease, so your own immune system attacks and neutralizes the insulin-secreting B cells of the pancreas, making you unable to control rising blood sugar. Why does your body do this? That's because type 1 diabetics are born with a genetic predisposition to the disease. That means somewhere in their DNA is coded to view the B cells as foreign invaders to the body. So we said that the beta cells of the pancreas are attacked by our own immune system and they no longer produce insulin. So without insulin, the blood sugar will start rising beyond healthy limits. When blood glucose gets a little bit too high, we become hyperglycemic, or high sugar in the blood. Let's talk about a couple of things that happen in the body when the sugar in your blood gets a little bit too high. First off, your kidneys can't officially filter the high amounts of glucose flowing in the blood, so some of it makes its way out of the body in urine, called glycosuria. Secondly, glucose is an osmotically active molecule, which means it tends to pull water with it. Since there's high amounts of glucose leaving the body as urine, water is drawn with it, causing us to urinate bigger volumes. This is called polyuria. The second problem is coined starvation in the face of plenty. It's called this because your cells, although surrounded by tons of glucose, can't shuttle the sugars into the cell and use them as energy, so they're essentially starving for energy. Your body has to then rely on other sources of fuel, such as proteins and fats, which take a little bit longer to process and leaves you with lower amounts of available energy sources. If you don't have ample fuel sources to function, you end up feeling tired, fatigued, and hungry. So what can diabetics do to prevent from becoming hyperglycemic? The first thing they do is closely monitor their blood sugar, and the way they do this is by checking blood glucose levels in the capillaries of the fingers. Normal ranges for blood glucose are between 70 to 130 milligrams per deciliter, and if blood sugar levels are getting a little high, usually after a meal, they take insulin. Insulin must be taken through subcutaneous injections for absorption into the bloodstream. There's a complicated mess of specific dosing and timing instructions, along with slow and fast-acting forms of insulin that non-diabetics don't have to worry about because our body does the timing and dosing for us. This means it can be easy to overestimate the amount of insulin needed or skip a meal because you were in a rush, and now more glucose was shuttled into the cells in storage than you had to spare in the bloodstream, so your blood sugars start to drop below a safe level. This is called hypoglycemia, or low sugar in the blood. This is especially dangerous because there is one organ in particular that uses glucose and nothing but glucose to operate, the brain. And when your brain is deprived of fuel, it begins to essentially shut off. First signs and symptoms of hypoglycemia are going to be lightheadedness, sweating, nausea, vomiting, and just feeling like you're going to pass out. Levels continue to dip, and confusion, sleepiness, unconsciousness will follow. If levels are allowed to get too low, you can die. Generally speaking, diabetics are pretty good at picking up on these things and can take some form of fast-digesting, simple carbohydrate, such as glucose tablets or juice, and see relief within minutes. So there's some long-term complications that can arise from poorly managed diabetes. Chronic bouts of hyperglycemia have been found to degrade vascular tissue, resulting in damage to the capillaries nourishing sensory nerve fibers, the glomerulus of the kidneys, and the retina of the eyes. The arteries of the heart can also be affected, increasing the risk of heart disease.